Good morning and welcome to the 6th edition of AE Talks. My name is Peter and I'm part of the Advanced Engineering team. Today we're hearing from Aristides Matopoulos, Associate Professor in Supply Chain Design and Logistics Systems from Aston University. Aris will be taking us through the key actions for navigating through crises and how an improved understanding of your supply chain can help you to achieve your objectives. I'm sure there'll be lots of engagement throughout, so before we get started, I'd like to take you through some housekeeping. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a chat function, a questions function, and a polls function. Please say hello, add comments, and share tips and opinions in the chat function. The more engagement, the better for everyone. Note that it does make a slightly annoying pinging sound, but you can mute this by clicking on the audio button at the top of the screen. If you're having trouble finding that, it just looks like a little bell. For any questions, make sure you ask these in the questions tab rather than in the chat tab. It will make it much easier for us to see them and therefore to provide you with the answers. Note that questions can also be voted up the list so that the same ones are not asked multiple times. Aris will look to answer your questions following his presentation. We also have some polls which will be asked throughout, so look out for these in the polls tab and make sure you answer them there. Note that there are already a couple that have been uploaded, so feel free to have a quick look in there now. Aris's contact details will be posted in the chat, so if we don't manage to answer all of your questions today, you will be able to contact him directly after the event. So, without further ado, I'll now hand over to Aris, and I'll see you at the end for Q&A.
Many thanks, Peter, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning. It's an interesting morning because we just heard yesterday that Aston University was awarded the University of the Year award from The Guardian. So that's great news. And we're particularly proud because a lot of the work we do at Aston University is really about engaging with businesses. And part of the engagement is today's presentation. So as Peter said, there are already two questions which I'd like to ask you to answer using the poll tab, but there will be a few more at the end of the presentation. Okay, just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. I'll just make a quick introduction and then move on to key observations from COVID. And perhaps the juiciest part of the presentation is the planning ahead, what you should and what you shouldn't be doing. And then I'll close with a final section on how we think we can help you. So a bit of introduction. So I'm working in the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. We are actively engaged in a number of projects. And what I've got here is a list of projects that we work with approximately 200 businesses in various regions in the country, including the Marches, Cambridgeshire, Shropshire, and so on and so forth. So Agri project focuses on agri-tech sector, and Site is focusing on auto, aerospace and rail, and UK-centric supply chains is focusing on manufacturing and engineering companies. So what we do, we engage with the businesses, we offer support. There's a group of academics that is in close touch with the business. We come up with a plan and interventions, and we follow through the entire journey. So that's on top of what every other academic is doing, which is disseminating research, designing research, publishing research, and sharing some of the results with the audience. So I thought with this really interesting quote by an American journalist, it's almost like a disclaimer of this presentation. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So that was by A.T. Mencken, the previous century. I think this is a really nice point, because for every business, there's probably many different potential solutions. So what I'm coming today is not to say what you should be doing, and there isn't a panacea of solutions for every business. But what I'd like to do is really trigger a little bit of your thinking process, which will hopefully result in some actions. This is an overview of the COVID-19 timeline globally in the UK. I'm not going to bother you with the details, but it has been a very bumpy ride the last few months. What seemed back in December, and I clearly remember myself, was doing a lot of traveling back then. What seemed as a someone else's problem ended up in everybody's problem, and we've been in ups and downs. We seem now to be moving in the right direction with vaccination planning and all that. But for businesses, it has been particularly difficult months. I think one of the first lessons learned from this pandemic is that I think generally businesses, including governments, have underestimated the impact of the pandemic, and I came up with three main reasons why this happened. I think the first thing, because we now have a much more globalized supply chain. There's anecdotal evidence that even for a modest cup of coffee, we've got many firms and many countries being involved. The second point, which became very obvious but rather late, was that a lot of dependence, manufacturing dependence, particularly for some equipment, protective equipment, was dependent on Asia, and that's changed a lot since the previous disaster. So in this 10-15 years, where the dependence increased tremendously, and we kind of lost track of and visibility of the supply chain. And the third reason, which I will easily blame social media in a way, is that this echo chamber, a lot of the actions that citizens, consumers were doing was inspired by this echo chamber, this panic buying we noticed in some countries. Moving forward, this was a relatively recent poll from Make UK, and if you read the statistics, you'll probably see that 80 out of 100 businesses, there were one way or another were affected, and the supply chains were affected, and this impact was an ongoing impact. Only 2 out of 10 companies said that they didn't experience any problem. So the majority of companies has been affected. So what I will be doing now, I'll just talk you through some ideas and some actions that you should perhaps consider in short and medium term. And short and medium term obviously can mean different things to different companies and different sectors. But I'm thinking probably the timeline is weeks, a couple of months, as opposed to longer term planning, which probably is a year or a bit longer. So in terms of key actions, I put together some points that I think are extremely important. So the first point I've got is you need to make sure you encourage manufacturing continuity on all fronts. And the question is, how do you do it? The answer to the question is by creating allocation strategies for constrained materials. What we found out is that many manufacturing engineering businesses realized that there were problems with some constrained materials, and businesses that had clear to build, that the acronym C2B, clear to build processes in place, were able to prioritize production and manufacturing versus other businesses. So that's an important point. So the clear to build, make sure you've got a detailed material flow for your production. The second point is really about the importance of completing the orders, collecting payments, and essentially by implementing rotor systems in your manufacturing, balance the workforce between sites. The third point is about lead times and variety. And one of the interesting realizations in the last few months is that actually consumers are not necessarily interested in increased variety or lead times, and they are willing to wait, and they are willing to see less products on the shelf in terms of variety. This is a real photo taken from a UK retailer store. If you see carefully, you'll see that these packages are packages of flour, and they are 16 kg, 16 kilos. But for those of you who do a little bit of shopping, you know that the packaging is mainly of flour is mainly 1 kilo or 1.5 or 2. You never see 16 kilos packages. That goes to show that I think a lesson is that sometimes you need to be able to review your product portfolio and ask the question: do I really need all these products and such an extensive product line? So I think that's an important consideration, and also relaxation of how levels. We've been bombarded about the importance of time and how critical it is to deliver products ASAP. But in times like this, service levels, I think, can be a bit more relaxed. So these two things, service levels and a reviewed product range, is actually quite important. Extremely important, and I'm highlighting this, is the financial flow going for your suppliers. You're only as strong as your weakest suppliers. So you need to be in a position to help suppliers or small suppliers, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, and improve payment terms. We have seen during the pandemic a number of companies that actually pushed back payments to small suppliers to help increasing liquidity and cash flow. So I think that's a key point. And the last point from this initial set of actions, it's really about understanding the demand signals. What many businesses realized during the pandemic is that they had very little understanding of demand, whether there are orders being placed, and I think what you should be doing is simply get in touch with your customers. So pick up the phone and speak to them, or sometimes service providers. This is an important role that lots of logistics service providers have played during the pandemic. They've got first-hand experience of what is happening. They speak to your customers, so they could give you updates on general changes in demand in the market. So do not underestimate that. So what I'm going to do also now is I'm going to talk you through the process, and this is something that I've realized over the years and because crises come and go every now and then, probably not with the same scale as this one, but there are some common themes, some common patterns in the way businesses react. So what do firms normally do when they are squeezed? Without picking on specific companies here, these are some news stories from recent newspapers, and you'll see that a lot of businesses axe rolls, reduce investments in plant and machinery, and essentially what they are doing is that they are applying some blanket cost-cutting measures. So what you see on this slide is the assumption that in any business, only 10% of the activities add value, 30% of the activities are necessary but not value-adding, and there's 60% of activities that are neither necessary nor value-adding activities. So I think what I've realized over the years that a lot of businesses in times like this will simply apply blanket cost-cutting measures without really asking the question, am I cutting budgets from the right activities? In fact, I've been rather optimistic here by saying that 10% of your business activities are value-adding, because we've got a lot of data which suggests different things. Tesla, for example, which is one of the most iconic manufacturers at the moment, in a recent interview by Elon Musk, he made the statement that he thinks his volumetric efficiency of the factories is no more than 2-3%. So that's far away from 10%. So if Tesla is 2-3%, then I wonder what other businesses are doing. So the next thing that businesses do is they speak to their suppliers when they are squeezed, and a lot of these discussions are really around price cuts. And often these discussions end up in a take it or leave it situation, where the big boy in the negotiation dictates the terms of the relationship by asking a price cut. I think there's a huge opportunity here for both buyers and suppliers, manufacturing engineering companies, to really understand what is really the price and what do they actually pay for. There is a misconception, and I think a lot of sellers they're only looking at the price. Equally, a lot of buyers looking at the price. But I think what the discussion really needs to be is about this box in the middle. So you need to be able to have a meaningful conversation about how do you reduce cost from your operations entirely, and if that means better tooling, if that means improvements in material flows or reduction in labor, then that be the discussion to have. But if you are just sticking on price, then you'll never be able to justify some of these discussions. So I think there's a need here to understand the potential inefficiencies. And in situations, in crises like this is a great opportunity to go deep and ask these questions. And it doesn't have to be this way, because what we know from other sectors is that there can be a collaboration to reduce overall cost. This is a research survey from apparel sourcing organizations and suppliers, and the question was, what measures have you taken to reduce distress at your suppliers? And the top answer was collaboration in overall cost reduction efforts. That is very different from saying, I need a price cut of 10 or 15%. What do firms do next? I think down the line, companies realize that the first initial wave of reductions, of budget cuts, hasn't gone very far and hasn't been very effective. So what they do next is they rediscover lean principles. So they go back to this 60% block, the red block you see on the screen, and they come up with ambitious plans to make their operations and make the business more lean. I think reality hits a few months later, but they realize that the actual improvements of implementing lean thinking are much less than what they initially expected. And what they also realize is that a lot of these improvements cannot be achieved without the help of suppliers. So my 2 points here is that if you want to become lean, you will only be as good as your supply chain. And a second thing is you cannot assume that your supply chain will fall in line. So you need to be able to communicate why you're asking for improvements, and also what is the benefit for both businesses. And that's something that often is not clear. Now, speaking about long-term planning, I think there's a lot to be learned from previous crises, and there's an interesting research done some years ago by some researchers who looked at 3 previous big economic crises: the 80 crisis, the 90 slowdown, and the 2000 bust. They looked at the data of about 4,000 or 5,000 businesses, and they realized that about 10% flourished after a slowdown, about the 1/5 did not survive, and 3/4 of the businesses did not regain the pre-recession growth rates for sales and profits 3 years after a recession. So I think what's the lesson here for us is that we need to accept that there's going to be a level of businesses who will not make it, but there's going to be also some businesses who will be able to take advantage. So the question is, what are the elements or what are the characteristics that these businesses have to be successful in this new environment? So this research went on further, and they looked at 3 different options and decisions that companies took. The first one, which is the one that I've been presenting in the last 2 slides, was cutting costs faster and deeper than rivals. The probability of success from roaring out from recession was 21%. The second option was to boldly invest more than rivals during the recession, and that came up with a higher probability of success, of 26%. And the final one, which had by far the more chances for success, 37% probability, was to have a balanced plan between cutting costs and investing. And I think that's really one of the messages I'd like to share with you, is that you shouldn't be just looking at minimizing or shrinking the red box, the red block. You should really be trying to improve your value-adding activities. Now, in terms of future steps and lessons, I've got two main points here. The first point is that, and speaking about vaccination and speaking about PCRs and tests, I think this crisis is a tremendous opportunity to test your supply chain for, as I say, disruption antibodies. You can really go back and have a project where you actually see how you responded and how your supply chain responded during the pandemic. We all know that we're going to have in the future, perhaps not on the same scale, but similar crises. So I think there's an important process in learning some of the lessons from this crisis, and often businesses are too busy to look back. But I think on this occasion, it's really a huge opportunity to go back and test how good your supply chain. Which brings me to really the fundamental question of my presentation is, how well you know your supply chain? A lot of businesses, and this is something that I've come up on a number of occasions in engaging with lots of businesses, assuming you are the focal company in the middle, that's the black box. The best case scenario is that you've got quite good understanding of tier 1 and some of the tier 2 suppliers, and probably significantly less understanding of your customers. Many of the businesses I found, they really don't understand what is the supply chain they're in, what is actually their the final customer. So I think there's an important lesson here to reflect on where is your place in your supply chain, and the way to do it is by supply chain mapping. I've been interacting with businesses. Recently, I had communication with some companies. We did some diagnostics for them. It came as a surprise that a lot of the tier 2 suppliers were Asian suppliers. They had assumed that because they were buying from tier 1 suppliers in the UK, that somehow everything was sorted. And they realized that all of the tier 2 suppliers were overseas suppliers. And as a result, they started panicking, ordering, piling up inventories, and so on and so forth. Whereas what they could have done is really trying to identify suppliers which are either in the UK or in Europe. So you can only start answering these questions if you get into the habit of mapping your supply chain. So what I'm going to do now, we're going to do a little bit of testing. So there's going to be a little bit of interaction. I've got 10 quick questions to give you an initial overview of how good or your understanding is about your supply chain. So if you please go to the poll. And if you start, please, answering the questions. There are 10 questions. So the first one is, do you have a good view of how your supply chain is structured? Please answer yes or no. The second one, and I can see the scores changing. There's a 50-50 score at the moment. Second question, can you analyze its complexity? That is to say, who, what, when, how. A key question follows. Do all your functions, e.g. manufacturing, logistics, have the same understanding of your supply chain? Yes or no? Fourth question, do you understand the influence of your supplier's supply chain on your own business? That is in terms of other required components or material. The following question is, do you routinely evaluate your supply chain for warning signs of distress? So for example, if you've got a supplier who's banging on your door, requesting better payment terms or some sort of financial support. Next one, can you identify risk in reaction to an incident at the supplier's or the customer's side? Remember, the supply chain is not just about understanding your suppliers, but also about understanding your customers. Now things are getting a bit more difficult. Did you have a plan when there's a problem within your supply chain? I'm delighted to see that 6 out of 10 participants and companies say that they've got a plan. Next question, do you know how a change in your supply chain would impact the business? Yes or no? Can you identify the critical paths in your supply chain? Yes or no? Can you model and compare different supply chains, evaluate trade-offs and identify best alternatives if problems occur? And then at the end, make sure you answer also, if you haven't done it so far, what function in the business you represent and what is your organization's primary industry, so aerospace, automotive, and so on and so forth. Now, if you have your responses handy, and we can resume the presentation now. If you scored 10 out of 10, that's perfect. You're one of the privileged ones where you have no issues in your supply chain. If you've scored 7, that's a good score, but there's room for improvement. If you've scored less than 6, your supply chain needs attention. And if you scored about 2 or 3, then you probably need to take a good look on your supply chain. This very quick diagnostic is really to get you thinking about your supply chain. And in fact, it's the first step of some of the interactions and interventions we do with businesses, followed by a more complete assessment of your supply chain. My second point, and that I'm close to the end now, is that one thing that we learned and we're learning from this pandemic is that we need to be able to embrace disruption. So when assessing suppliers, now you should be also looking to incorporate disruption metrics, so how fast they can respond to a change, for example, as opposed to, or in addition to the traditional cost time measures and KPIs. I think what we also learned is that there's a huge potential from the procurement supply chain function, because procurement can actually secure your revenues. So it should have been seen as a cost savings exercise. So if you keep materials coming, you keep the factory running, keep the machines running. So it shouldn't be seen as a cost saving initiative only. And the third point is really about diversification of your supply chain. but that doesn't mean at all cost. I think we can help you at Aston. We've developed a toolkit of some diagnostics and supply chain readiness assessment tools that we can help you. And also recently we joined forces with Resilink, and we offer 24/7, 365 days monitoring of your supply chain and identification, early warnings of events which could impact your supply chain. So I'd be delighted to speak to you about this. This is my final slide. I won't pretend that I'm a Chinese fluent speaker of Chinese, but I'm told that crisis in Chinese is two letters for the word crisis, and the one stands for danger, and the other one stands for opportunity. So I think whilst in the beginning probably we were looking at the danger and the risk, I think it's time now to really look at what we can learn and what are the opportunities for manufacturing engineering businesses. So my message is clear, and I could summarize in one sentence: don't think of your supply chains as an afterthought. Make sure you involve supply chain right from the beginning. I would even go as far to say from when you are designing a product or a process. And on that note, and hopefully I'm not too late, you can see my contact details. I'd be happy to have further conversations with you, and I'm open to questions now.
Thank you, Aris. Some wise words to finish there. Most appreciated. We have the first question in, which I'll get to in just a second. First of all, we have put up a feedback poll. Note that there's only one question on there, so it won't take you too long at all. The first question from Martin Hyatt. You talk about supply chain and testing it under disruptive times. However, is there something specific you can do with respect to the supply chain that would have a positive effect on the value chain?
Absolutely, and that's probably my last closing sentence. I think the point I was trying to make is that yes, supply chain can be a way to mitigate a lot of the problems, a lot of the crises. But if you involve supply chain thinking, even in the early stages of designing a product, then we can really talk about impacting the value chain. A lot of the times, and that's something that I've experienced with lots of engineering manufacturing companies. Decisions about supply chain are taken at the very end. It's probably the prototype phase of a product, and that's way too late. So I think there's huge room for improvements by including supply chain design at the beginning. We used to, there's a famous framework we use, a three-dimensional concurrent engineering. So traditionally concurrent engineering is about designing for the product and designing for manufacturing. And I think most businesses probably are quite good at doing that. But what I find from speaking to businesses is that the elements of supply chain is not there. So what we're basically advocating, certainly myself and my group at Aston, is that we really should be talking about design for supply chain. And I hope I've answered Martin's question.
Thank you. The next question from Shirley Hodson Walker. How can businesses get supply chain support?
Well, thank you. There's many ways. And there isn't one size fits all Aston University, we've got lots of different initiatives. I've mentioned at the beginning some of the projects. So if you are an eligible company and you can visit some of these websites, so UK-centric supply chains, if you just Google it, or the other projects, Ensuite or Agritech, you'll find some more details about this project. We are specifically targeting business support. So we're offering business support, 12 hours business support, minimum of 12 hours business support. So what we're going to do is we will come to your business, we'll sit together with you with probably more than one functions, and we'll do some initial diagnostics. And then we'll come up with a plan and interventions. And this is driven by the company. So, we're not gonna impose things to you, because every company is different, but we actively going to work together with you, and I think that's the one of the ways. Of course, there's opportunities for KTPs or knowledge transfer partnerships, and in fact, at National we're quite good at KTPs, so we'll be happy to speak to businesses about all these opportunities.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question from Kit Lee. What are you seeing in terms of capacity in businesses and supply chains?
That's a big one. It's a quite general question. Capacity is one thing. I think for me, it's not a question of capacity, or to some extent, probably the biggest challenge is the question of capabilities. And I think I'll answer also indirectly a question I see by Simon about reshoring and nearshoring. I think, yes, we will see, and we are seeing a little bit of reshoring, but I wouldn't expect to see huge changes, because all these supply chains have been designed and set up in the way they were for a reason, and that's efficiency, that's cost driving some of the decisions. So that's one aspect of the answer. The second angle is this lack of capabilities. Don't assume, and in fact we did have project with businesses that wanted to bring back production from India to the UK, and businesses realized that the capabilities that existed 10 years ago were no longer there, no longer here in the UK. So saying reshoring is the way to go, or listening to President Trump talk about reshoring in the US, the statistics and the data tell a very different story in terms of how successful these initiatives have been.
Thank you. The next question is sort of 3 in 1, so just bear with me whilst I try and decipher it a little bit. So it's from Simon Garbett. Do you think that COVID-19 as well as Brexit will further fuel a move towards reshoring and nearshoring supply chain in 2021 and beyond? Also, the use of technology, automation, and digitalization. What's the role of those 3 in assisting this? And what is the place for just-in-time and lean in closer to home supply networks?
I think I had Simon's question in mind when I was answering the previous question. So I think I've answered the point around reshoring or nearshoring. Now the question about use of technology, automation, digitization to assist. It's an easy answer, yes, but I think the problem for businesses is that you really need to understand and be able to distinguish what's the hype, what's the reality. Often some of these terms, some of these technologies are really presented as the panacea, as the silver bullet for every problem. We engage with lots of SMEs, and speaking about additive manufacturing, or digital twins in their context is completely out of the discussion. So yes, in principle. However, I'm cautious that the uptake or the adoption of some of these technologies it's going to take a lot of time. And the third point: what's the place for just-in-time and leaning closer to home supply networks? Yes, but that's then again linked to capabilities, and I think we haven't got a very good understanding of the capabilities we've got in the country. I think we do a lot of assumptions about capabilities we think we have, or capacity we think we have, but somehow at the end we realize that that's not quite the case. And that's why there's a lot of policy initiatives and government initiatives to help boosting certainly some of the sectors which lag behind.
Brilliant, thank you. One question from me, I'm slightly curious. So you mentioned that 60% of activity doesn't really add any value to a company. What kind of thing does that include?
Sorry, can you please repeat, Peter?
Yeah, no problem. So you mentioned that 60% of activity at a business doesn't add any value and isn't essential. What kind of activity are you referring to?
Yeah, it could be simple things. It could be lots of handoffs in a production process, for example, between steps. Yeah, so use of space, use of assets in general. That's something that there's clearly room for improvement. There's a general discussion about. I think a general question about what value is. I think lots of businesses, if you ask them the question, what do you think is the value that you deliver to your customer, they will probably have hold on a second moment. I don't think they'll be able to give a straightforward answer, and that's often a sign of that problem, I think.
Fair enough. I think I'll give people a few seconds in case there are any final questions to come in, but I think that might be it. So yeah, I'd just like to say, in case something comes in the meantime, I'll let you know. But thank you ever so much for your time today on the presentation, and obviously for answering all of your questions.
Thanks for your time, and thanks for the time of the attendees. I hope there was something useful, interesting in the presentation. I'd be happy to speak to them.
Fantastic. And as you said, your contact details were put up in the chat and are on the slide. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation afterwards, feel free to email Aris directly. So again, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for your time, Aris. And we'll be back again next week with a webinar from Polytech. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the week, and have a great rest of the morning.
Thank you all.
Take care. Bye.